Today we are going to learn how to spot whether or not you or a loved one may be dealing with racial trauma. 1, they may seem to affirm white people or characteristics of whiteness more often than they might be affirming elements of blackness or brownness or just other characteristics that people of color have. Examples of this include maybe a grandmother stopping whenever they see a white child and being like, oh wow, you have beautiful blonde curls. And while it's okay to appreciate that which God has made, it's not okay to overvalue that with other things that God has made. So maybe you might notice that same grandmother doesn't necessarily compliment babies of color. Maybe it's that there's black babies that are passing by and they'll be like, oh, okay, like I'm really happy for you, like cute baby, but there's not really that extra passion and desire to kind of compliment the different features that maybe God has given them specific to their racial identity, right? But you see that there's a tendency to maybe want to compliment that white attribute, right? Or that particular white person, or maybe it's that you feel more comfortable with white people than you do with maybe your own racial group or maybe other racial groups of color. There's a lot of other ways that this can be, that it can show up. It can show up in a variety of ways. But tip number 1 to spot it, ask yourself, do they seem to be complimenting white people or elements of whiteness more than Black, Indigenous, and other people of color? Another sign is maybe they keep equating bad things with Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. That's not nice. One example is saying things like bad neighborhood and just equating that with areas that are predominantly Black and brown, right? Another thing is maybe when they use other kind of racialized terms like thugs, ghetto, a lot of other things, violent, aggressive. There's a whole big list of so many words that have been racialized to equate, again, negative things with Black and brown people. Again, if you see this, this is a sign that either you or your loved one is unfortunately experiencing the ramifications of racial trauma. Another, they tend to separate themselves from other people of color. So this can happen a variety of ways. It can happen in groups. So for example, I'm Black and I can try to separate myself from other Black people. I can be like, I'm not like them. I've heard so many things. And it really breaks my heart whenever I hear that. It's like, why are you feeding into white supremacy? That doesn't make any sense. Can we say this again?
That doesn't make any sense.
But the fact of the matter is that some of us have experienced trauma so deeply that we want to separate ourselves from people who look like us so that we're not judged in the same way that we know, particularly white people, have been socialized to see us. If you are saying this as a Black, Indigenous, or other person of color, then this is a sign rather that you are experiencing some of the consequences, some of the impacts of racial trauma. Another sign is not being in love with the natural way that God has made you. They're not in love with their natural hair. Listen, I've gone through it. I know a lot of people have gone through it. Maybe it's not their natural hair. Maybe it's the natural attributes that God has given them outside of their hair. Maybe it's their nose. Maybe it's their lips. Maybe it's their skin. Maybe it's their eyes. Whatever the case is, any natural attribute that is very specific and near and dear to you as a member of your racial identity, if you are not in love with it, if you are like unconsciously hating it, if you want to kind of cover it up, if you want to make it conform to white culture, again, this is a sign that you are experiencing the ramifications of racial trauma. Another sign that you might be, or other people of color who you're in company with might be experiencing the ramifications of racial trauma, is if you or them or all of y'all use colonized language.
What do you mean by colonized language, Marlysa?
This is what I mean. My hair is wild. I need to tame this beast. Wild, tame beast. It others us. It makes us synonymous with animals and beast-like. It connotes the fact that we are subhuman. Again, with the construction of race and the fact that, particularly for Black people, but for other people of color, of course, we have been synonymized with being subhuman. So anything that equates us and reinforces that narrative is colonial by nature, but some of us still use today. Put it in the comments if you've heard that. I know I've heard it a lot of times. Another phrase is dun dun dun.
Their culture is so exotic.
Don't say this.
It's problematic. Why is their culture exotic? Who says that it's exotic? It's usually white people who are saying it's exotic because it's different than white culture. It's not exotic. It's just their culture. And my all-time favorite, my hair is easier to manage when it's straight. What does manage mean, and why does our hair have to be managed? Why can't it just exist? Maybe because colonizers had this thought that we needed to be controlled. Just a thought. We can't address racism effectively if we only focus on some of the aspects of racism and don't focus on some of the other aspects of racism that might be difficult, right? Specifically for Black and Indigenous and other people of color, right? Like, I know as a Black woman, it's difficult to sometimes look in the mirror and be like, ooh, how have I internalized like white supremacy, like, and made me feel like all types of like oppressed and like all that stuff, right? It's uncomfortable, but guess what? It is part of the work that we need to do as people of color to start the healing process so that we can even be better advocates towards ending racism. Hope that this blessed you. I will see you later.